From CBS 47 and Fox 30, you're watching This Week in the 904.
Welcome to This Week in the 904. I'm your host, Jake Stofan. This is a community affairs show, and it will focus on politics, public policy, and issues that affect our local communities. Joining us today is Fleming Island State Representative Sam Garrison. Garrison is next in line to become Speaker of the Florida House beginning next year, so some big shoes to fill with Danny Perez obviously leaving the helm. Thanks for joining us, Representative Garrison. I appreciate it. You're the first guest, so we'll see how this goes.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Always happy to be with a fellow Fleming Island. Fleming Island.
That is true. We both come from Fleming Island, so it's like kind of a fitting first guest.
The homecoming. That's right.
So this will be airing just ahead of the start of the 2026 legislative session. Wanted to jump right into sort of the hottest topic. Of course, that's going to be property taxes. Governor wants to fully eliminate all homesteaded property taxes. We've seen lots of different proposals filed in the House so far. How involved have you been in those conversations?
I guess thankfully involved, and that's a credit to Speaker Perez and his leadership style. He's very, wants all opinions on the table, very, very inclusive in that respect. So glad to be part of those conversations. Look, ultimately what we do in property taxes, the goal is to put more money in people's pockets. In my job as the Speaker designate, we look at a lot of data from around the state, on top of just your personal gut instinct, people you know and talk to. What we hear over and over again is prices are high and they're putting a lot of pressure on people, especially young families and working families. So we're looking for any way we can to acknowledge that and to put money back in people's pockets. And one of the things we can do is try to provide relief on property taxes, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, as I mentioned, there's several different proposals in the House right now. Some are kind of just additional homestead exemptions in creative ways. Others are full elimination of property taxes, both school and local revenues. Do you have a preference at this point? Is there one that makes more sense, less sense to you?
Yeah, I think what the specifics are going to look like are to be determined. That's part of the negotiation process with the Senate, and obviously the governor has a big voice in this as well. I think where we're looking at right now with the House, with a bill that's kind of moving through our process, sponsored by Representative Busada down in Miami, makes a lot of sense, which is we're saying the cost of property insurance in Florida is just high. It's always going to be high. We're at sea level in a hurricane zone. It's just going to cost more to insure your home. So what we're trying to do is offset for those who are paying high property insurance rates on their homesteaded properties. Can we offset those costs with some portion of property tax relief? Without getting into the details, that's the basic thrust of it. Hopefully we'll find something that makes sense for homeowners and also can pass at the ballot with 60% in November, which is ultimately what has to happen for the change to take place.
I mean, the governor obviously he's kind of got his lane, carved out. He wants, no property tax for homesteaded properties. But the governor doesn't have veto power here, right? So whatever you guys come up with, he's going to have to
The governor does not have veto power for what we as a legislature put on the ballot. With that said, he's Governor DeSantis, and he certainly has a very powerful voice that we're going to pay attention to. We want to work with him on this. He gets a lot of credit for initiating this issue and bringing it forward. But you've heard a lot from the governor in recent weeks. I know you pay attention to this sort of stuff, Jake. He's the first one to say, I want to get rid of property tax altogether, but I also know we have to if it doesn't get 60% at the ballot, then what are we doing? So we're trying to balance that process of giving as much relief to homeowners as we can while simultaneously making sure we protect core services, law enforcement, schools, things like that, and have enough across the board support to get to that 60% threshold in November.
I mean, obviously the counties have a big voice in this as well. Fiscally constrained counties, the governor is basically saying, hey, backfill their budgets, using state tax dollars. What do you make of that idea? Because it's kind of like, is it fair for somebody in Duval County to pay for the budget in Putnam County?
The governor and I agree on a lot. This is one we do disagree on. I don't think it makes sense to backfill certain counties. I'm a big believer of that. If we're going to do something, it's good for everybody, and we all live by the same rules. That's part of being a conservative from my perspective. And certainly from a Clay County perspective, I want to make sure that Clay County is not carrying an inordinate burden in that process. So if whatever we do in property tax, the hope and the expectation is going to apply across the board, and we'll all, I think there is plenty of room in local government budgets to draw back a little bit and focus on those core services, but make sure that we protect and fully fund law enforcement, fire rescue, our schools, roads, things like that are core services. They need to be protected.
You mentioned obviously this has to go on the ballot. Voters have to approve it. It's a high threshold, 60%. But historically, it seems like any time there's anything property tax related, it passes with flying colors. 75, 80%. Do you think that if a proposal does go too far, voters are going to say, you know what, I'll keep paying this, even if it is something as extreme as full property tax elimination? Do you think?
I think voters are pretty sophisticated for the most part, and look, especially when we get close to election time in November, there's going to be obviously a gubernatorial election on the ballot. There's going to be a lot of attention on the state, but the number one issue, if property tax reform goes on the ballot, voters are going to pay attention, and not just homeowners, but renters and others who also pay property tax that may not be affected by this particular language. We want to make sure that whatever we're doing is sound policy. We want to walk the walk as fiscal conservatives, but also make sure that we're protecting those core services. If we can thread that needle, we're confident the voters will say yes. If we don't, then the opposite will be the case. But we're working really hard to get to that 60% plus one.
Well, Representative Garrison, I think we need to take a break, but don't go anywhere. Coming up, we'll hear from Representative Garrison on the unique role he'll be playing in the upcoming session as the man next in line to lead the Florida House.
From CBS 47 and Fox 30, you're watching This Week in the 904.
Well, we're back on This Week in the 904 with Fleming Island State Representative Sam Garrison, who's just one session away from taking the reins as Speaker of the Florida House. And Representative Garrison, when I was preparing for this, I was, thinking we'll go through all the bills that the different legislators have, but you don't have any bills.
No. When you're in the role that I'm in as chair of the Rules Committee, one of the things is you don't carry bills because you're responsible for shepherding all the other legislation from all your colleagues through the process. So there'll be nothing with my name on it.
And is that kind of just a tradition? I mean, do you have the option if you really wanted to, you could file a bill?
I guess you could, but the rules chairman determines what bills get on the calendar. And so when you're in that position, you want to avoid the appearance of playing favorites. And so as a general rule, when you're in the position that I'm in, if I'm running a bill, something bad has happened. So we try to focus on making my colleagues successful. And honestly, it frees me up to have a little more influence in a wider area of legislation than just the stuff I'm carrying myself.
So, I mean, as chair of the Rules Committee, pretty much, like you said, almost every single bill is going to go before you to some degree to make it to the floor. What are you looking for in legislation to say, this is worthwhile, I'm going to give this a hearing?
Yeah, the first thing you want to make sure is you're working in concert with the Speaker of the House. The Speaker in the Florida House sets the tone, sets the agenda. And Speaker Perez from Miami is a great friend and somebody I have the highest possible respect for. I like to say, in politics, people call themselves friends all the time, even if they don't like each other. But the Speaker is a friend, a real friend. And so whatever I can do this year to help him be successful in his last term as Speaker is my top priority. And then just helping members be successful. There's 120 members in the Florida House. 80 some odd Republicans, which is my personal responsibility as a member of that caucus. And so I want them to be successful. So as the rules chair, you're the gatekeeper for what legislation makes it through committee and then gets onto the floor to be voted on and sent over to the Senate and hopefully ultimately become law. And that's a pretty big responsibility in a state of 24 million people. So you're constantly talking with members from around the state, from Pensacola to Key West and everywhere in between, about what they're hearing, what they're passionate about, what's working, what's not working, and trying to make sure that the members are being heard, the bills are moving, and it's consistent with the Speaker's vision for the chamber. I enjoy it. You're playing traffic cop a lot, and kind of HR director simultaneously, and it's a fun role.
Obviously the Senate and the House have had better relationships in the past. That's probably a fair statement. They were acting in lockstep for several years in a row, and seen a little bit more disagreement between the chambers. I mean, how much consideration do you give to a bill will this be heard by the Senate? Is the Senate open to this? Obviously you're trying to carry out what the Speaker wants, but that may go.
Yeah, my focus is in the role that I'm in right now is exclusively on the members of the Florida House. Look, obviously I work with the Senate on things that are important to Clay County and to the First Coast in general. Senator Bradley, my colleague in Fleming Island, who is the senator for our district, carries a tremendous amount of legislation on the other side, along with Senator Yarborough and my good friend Senator Davis. So you work with the Senate on things that are of local concern. The big picture, my focus is on the House and making sure that the 120 members of the House are having success, and that I'm doing whatever I can to help the Speaker be successful.
Well, give me an idea. I mean, obviously property tax is the number one thing for the governor, and I think the chambers are both looking at ways to sort of deliver on that in whatever way they can. But, as far as Speaker Perez goes, where do you imagine we'll kind of see those priorities land?
He's a healthcare guy, and I think you've seen in recent weeks some big bills get dropped that he's very passionate about, in healthcare reform, lowering the costs of prescription drugs, things of that nature. That's his background, so it makes sense. So I think you'll see a lot of emphasis on that this year. And that's an interesting debate in the chamber. There's a lot of differing opinions on. Everyone agrees that healthcare costs are too high, but how you get to lowered cost is an interesting debate point. So the Speaker cares a lot about that. You're going to see that be a big priority of the House this year. And then in general, Speaker Perez gets a lot of credit. He's walked the walk and not just talked the talk when it comes to reducing government spending. And we as the state have had some amazing years. Our economy's been booming post-COVID, but a lot of the federal money that everyone across the country was utilizing has thankfully dried up, and we're trying to live within our means. So as a result, we're having to cut our spending back in Florida as well. And he could very easily pass the buck on to me or Representative Kennedy or others who are kind of down the line in leadership, but he's taken it on himself to really walk the walk, and I'm grateful for that. So you're going to see a lot of emphasis in the House on budget this year, on fiscal discipline, on making sure we're getting a good return on the taxpayers' investments that they send to Tallahassee.
So given you don't carry any bills, are you still carrying funding requests, things like that? Like,
Sure.
How do you kind of deliver for your constituents when you can't carry a piece of legislation?
Yeah, you do it the same way you do anything else. I know what's important to Clay County. I know what's important to Jacksonville. I work very closely with our delegation in Clay County specifically, but obviously anybody in the First Coast, St. John's, Duval, Nassau, and make sure that the primary needs that we have as a region don't get forgotten or kind of subsumed by other parts of the state. It's a lot of conversations. It's a lot of subtle suggestions not to forget about what's important to us. Obviously, transportation infrastructure is a big deal, not just in Clay County, but certainly in St. John's and other parts of the region. And then the investments that the state's made in Jacksonville in recent years, specifically with the University of Florida's campus, where they should start breaking ground here in the next year, it's really incredible. We need to make sure to protect that funding, but also kind of build on it. I think what we're going to see in downtown Jacksonville in the next 5 to 10 years as a result of the investments that have been made and will continue to be made in the UF campus downtown are going to be really special for the region.
I got to ask you, obviously last year was very contentious between the governor and the House. There's a whole Florida investment. Do you think we'll see a lot of that this year? Or do you think it'll be a little tampered down?
I don't know. These things are fluid and dynamic. Time has a way of changing a lot of things. But Governor DeSantis is one of the most talented, strong-willed, just really effective executives in the nation, and Speaker Perez is the same. I mean, they're very similar people, very strong personalities, very principled, and so when they agree hard. When they disagree hard, and that's okay. That's how the system's supposed to work. It's designed to have a debate on ideas and priorities. But at the end of the day, as we saw last year, we ultimately had a balanced budget. We reduced spending, and we focused on the things that were most important to Floridians. And if your debate is on how much of a tax cut we're going to get, as opposed to if you're going to have a tax cut at all, then I think we're doing all right.
Yeah, hopefully a little bit less drama. We've got to take a break, but don't go anywhere. Coming up, we'll be looking way ahead with soon-to-be Speaker Garrison on how he plans on running the House when he takes over next year.
From CBS 47 and Fox 30, you're watching This Week in the 904.
We're back on This Week in the 904 with the man set to become Florida's next Speaker of the House, State Representative Sam Garrison. Representative Garrison, in the commencement or designation speech, I should say, that you gave, you said, quote, "Complacency is the single biggest threat to the conservative movement in Florida." Where do you feel like Republicans have maybe fallen short or gotten a bit complacent when it comes to public policy?
I think what I was trying to say with that statement is more an acknowledgement of human nature. I moved to Florida in 2001. Jeb Bush was governor. Shortly after Speaker Thrasher had left the Speaker's chair, and we've had an amazing 25-year run of success in the state since then. If you think about where we've come in recent decades, from there to where we are now, the third largest state in America, by all accounts, the 15th or the 16th largest economy in the world if we were our own nation. And just things continuing to pour in success after success. But we all know from experience, I don't care whether you're talking about the Jags or whether you're talking about us in the legislature, that when you've had success, the next season is always tough to bring back that same energy that you had before. And so I was trying to do in that callback was just to remind us that we can't rest on the laurels from the people who have come before us and built the Florida we all now enjoy. That we have to chart our own course and have that same energy and that same passion going forward. And for me, it's about focusing on what I call first-tier issues, which is a strong economy, safe streets, and quality schools. There's always going to be things that come up in Florida, whether it's hurricanes, whether it's any sort of issues we have with our unique environment, or just the challenge of having 24 some odd million people in a confined space. There's going to be things that flare up. But you got to focus on those first tier issues and go back to them over and over again. Are we making sure that we have a strong dynamic economy where people can find rewarding work and want to build their careers, this top talent when it comes to Florida? Are we making sure that we have safe streets, our communities are safe, that public safety is prioritized, honored, and made a first tier issue? And then obviously quality schools. If you're a parent, nothing matters more than your kids, and you want to make sure that our kids are educated and can do amazing things. So if we're focusing on those first tier issues, not getting complacent, I think we can do some good things ahead.
What do you think like the big policy item you'll have as Speaker might be, or what area would you like to focus on the most? Because I remember after, I think it was the 2022 session, the conversation was, Republicans have done everything that they wanted to do, and it took them 20 years to do it, but they all did it in one session. Where do they go next?
I could not reject that narrative anymore. I mean, that is just a false notion. There's no such thing as standing still. You're either moving forward or you're moving back. And so what we're going to continue to do is make sure, from an economics perspective, from the economy, that we are continuing to recruit, train, and retain top talent in every industry to want to come to Florida and make it the best state in America. I mean, I think we're there, but we could always be better. And then, for me, I'm a former prosecutor, so public safety is a big issue for me. I want to make sure that we have the infrastructure to be able to make sure that, our courts, our prison system, our police and law enforcement, that everybody's got the tools they need to be safe. And we have a criminal justice system that works. And then, education is evergreen. There's always things you can do to improve education, especially in the K-12 environment. I want to make sure that every kid in this state has the opportunity to access their God-given potential, whether you're in Fleming Island where we grew up, or you're down in inner city Jacksonville or Miami or the Keys or Pensacola, wherever. Every kid in Florida deserves a chance for a world-class education. So we'll focus a lot on those areas.
And you mentioned, public safety, and one of the areas you kind of teased in your designation speech was giving a little more love to prisons, I guess.
Yeah.
And not in that, you want to love people who are convicted of crimes necessarily, but things have gotten pretty bad in Florida prisons. I mean, we heard from the corrections secretary that assaults on prison staff are up 50% over the last few years. Just a severe sort of lack of experience with a high turnover rate of those staff members. It's not an easy sell, right? So how do you kind of envision yourself approaching that conversation?
Well, there's two things. Number one, I think having the backdrop of, I as a prosecutor, I sent a lot of people to prison for a long time. And I realized, being in the system and working with law enforcement like I did for a long time, that, when someone was convicted, they didn't just vanish into thin air. They went somewhere, right? And there are men and women doing a really difficult job day after day to make sure our prisons are safe and that they are keeping us safe in return. And the second part of that is just getting to know the people who are walking the beat. I mean, not Clay County specifically, but North Florida in general has a lot of corrections institutions, and there are a lot of folks doing really hard work for not a lot of money to make sure that those prisons work. And I just feel, when we say we're going to support law enforcement, it's not just the men and women walking the beat on the street, although that's a huge component of it. It's also the men and women wearing the badge behind the wire, making sure that our prison system is safe and effective. And I think that, if anything, may be an even tougher job. So we want to make sure we're supporting those people, people who choose to make their career in corrections, that we're making sure that it's an honorable career, that they feel rewarded by what they're doing, and simultaneously, it keeps us all safer when we do that.
Well, Representative Garrison, best of luck on that one.
Thank you.
I've seen many lawmakers try it, but
I think saying you're going to
sell.
fix it is impossible, but if you can make it a little bit better for the next guy, I'll count that success.
Well, Representative Garrison, thank you so much. You're my first guest, so
Happy to do it.
Perfect with you being from Fleming Island, me being from Fleming Island. That's all the time we have for today. Representative Garrison, again, thank you so much for joining us. And we'll be right back here next week, same time, same place, for This Week in the 904.
Thanks for watching This Week in the 904.